So, hello everybody. My name is Dave West, and I am CEO of Scrum.org, based here in the Boston area, and that's where I'm speaking to you from today. Hi. I used to live in Boulder, Colorado, so I'm definitely familiar with the whole Denver area. So, hopefully we're going to have some fun today. Should I carry on? Sorry, I just did the intro. Catherine.
Oh, absolutely. Take it
Okay, well, I'll
away
start
whenever
then.
you're
Sorry, I was
ready.
I was like,
Yeah.
hello. So hi everybody. Yes, my name's Dave. So I'm gonna try to stop occasionally just because I'll run out of energy and have to be refueled or something. No, stop and we can have maybe an opportunity for a question and the like. Feel free if I can't actually see the questions being posted, so maybe Catherine, you can monitor that if somebody doesn't feel comfortable speaking and wants to just sort of send a question, then when I start, we can maybe bring those up, or if somebody at that moment when I start, you can always raise those questions and we can talk about these things. Okay, so yeah, we're going to be talking about product owners versus product managers. It's an interesting, thorny topic, and I think actually increasingly my view of this, it's sort of evolved over the last 3 years when I've been talking about this and talking to the product management community and talking to the Scrum community about this. So hopefully I can share some of those insights. And I really do believe some of you may have seen my presentation on the Scrum Guide update. Who knew it would be interesting? Maybe it wasn't, I don't know. Some of the changes in the Scrum Guide are really illustrative of some of our changing thinking and emphasis that we're really trying to place on the accountability of product owners. And we'll talk a lot more about that as we go over the next few slides. So for the people that don't know me, I run this organization called Scrum.org, created by this gentleman called Ken Schwaber. It's actually Ken Schwaber's birthday today. He turns 76. So this morning I was over at his house eating, well, I didn't actually eat them, but giving donuts. I don't really like donuts. Donuts and coffee this morning with Ken. He says hi, and I got him in a sugar high, and then I left like any good, sort of visitor. But yeah, so founded by Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum. You know what we do, certification, training. We have about 350 trainers all around the world, which has been very interesting during COVID. I've definitely had a sort of almost a sort of blow by blow in different parts of the world, like China and Australia and New Zealand and Europe and Italy and Turkey and the Middle East, and seeing sort of what's happening around the world. It's been incredibly interesting. And one surprising element of having a 350 person training community spread throughout the world. Anyway, you know who we are, so I'm not going to bore you with that. Now, a lot has changed since I last talked to you in February. Or has it? I think, has lots changed? Well, yes. Well, no, I'm still in this same room talking to you. I'm wearing a different shirt. I bought a new shirt, hopefully like that. Or I really don't know what's going on. I feel that increasingly COVID and the world around me is just, I don't know about you, but I just don't. Planning is incredibly hard. I'm on my 4th trip to the UK to see my family. I've booked it 4 times. This is the last time I've booked it. I'm hoping in November I'm going to go and see my mum, who I've not seen in a little bit over two and a bit years. And it just seems that is the world that we live in. And when we talked in February, I was talking about this is really illustrative of that, that Kalita Perez moment that we talked about as the pivot from the industrial age to the post-industrial age, which maybe we call it digital age, and how this is the catalyst for that change. And maybe that is. Since then, though, I've really been reading quite a lot of things, and I found this interesting book that I'll share with you. We're in this age of accelerations, and this Thomas Friedman in New York Times, Washington Post geezer. He wrote the World is Flat. It's quite kind of interesting. He actually also wrote a book that used to be us, which is about the demise of the US education system, which is surprisingly not as depressing as the title illustrates, and really quite interesting about where education needs to go and the like, which was kind of cool. But anyway, so he's written a few books, but he talks about this sort of globalization. I don't know about if you saw in the UK, they've run out of petrol. Primarily because they haven't got enough drivers to drive the petrol from the refineries to the petrol stations because of Brexit. Obviously most of the Polish lorry drivers had to leave because of population movements and changes, because of technology changes as well. That's there's all the amount of information now allows people to rapidly empty the appropriate petrol station as people find them still going. It's just interesting that we're in this sort of age, we've sort of entered this supernova. And the only reason why I say this, the only reason why I say this really is at the heart of all of this is the need for us to become value stream or product centric. Ultimately we have to start aligning our organizations not around the way in which we think of the systems, but instead around the customers and the outcomes that we perceive are valuable. We see increasingly that smaller empowered teams focusing on delivering value with a clear customer in mind are the most effective ways of dealing with this. And, case in point, we talked a lot, I think, on my last trip about, my last virtual visit, about this organization, the Broad Institute, set up a COVID lab, testing lab within a week, 5 days, right? Scrum, happen to use Scrum, irrelevant that they're using Scrum really. The art of the possible, they managed their constraints, they did it, right? Incredible. If you'd have had 100 people working on it, it probably wouldn't have been delivered. The fact that this pattern of, when you're in a crisis mode, what's the first thing that you do? You create a war room, you put these boards up, you get access to the executives to make decisions rapidly. You have a small team of people. My wife used to work for a company called Biogen, and they had an MS drug that was recalled. The FDA recalled the drug, and she was working in support. She'd just come out of college and she was on the help desk, helping patients take the medication and all that kind of stuff. Suddenly she was moved upstairs into this massive boardroom with 20 other people, and suddenly the CIO, who she'd never met, was suddenly talking to her on an hourly basis, and they executed this massive recall, which had huge implications to the organization and to the customers and to the patients, etc. And they worked in a very dynamic and agile way. When I talk about Scrum, when I bore her about Scrum, she goes, well, that's how we did. We didn't call it Scrum though, we just called it getting stuff done. And that's pretty much the case, right? But ultimately it's about aligning to your customer. They had a very clear understanding of the customers, the patients, the doctors, the whole model was ahead of them. And actually they split the teams up into focusing on different groups of that medicine supply chain, as it were, which is interesting. And at the end of the day, it's about requiring ownership and vision. It's about driving change rapidly. It's about making decisions. And remember that we don't actually know the implications of the decisions we make. We don't have an understanding of the impact until sometimes we've released that decision. Now, if you've been to Jeff Patton's product owner class, and I know he's at CST, but I know him very well. He's a great guy. And when you see what he talks about, he talks about making the smallest economic decision sometimes to get the most learning into the system rapidly. So to do that, though, you have to have decision makers directly connected to this whole process. Traditional industrial thinking, or that industrial mindset of decoupling the sort of decision making from the execution, does not actually work. So I would argue that many of the things that the direction that product management, whether you call it agile product management or product ownership, is going, ultimately is about effectively managing this empirical process in a more effective way, providing those decisions to help to actually give that feedback and that learning faster into the system. So at the heart of it, I think that is exactly what we're in the business. Oh God, I don't like so even though it's a little out of focus for some strange reason, or it might be just me at this time, the product person, right? Now, notice I've avoided the word product owner or product manager or product leader at the moment. We'll be talking a lot about that later on, about what are these people called. And I hate to give a bit of a spoiler, but I don't really care. And I'll explain a lot more about that later as well. But anyway, so what most product people end up in their life is, and I think somebody said it in that sort of that icebreaker, sort of like schizophrenic, I think was the word, or split personalities, or you're managing all these disparate groups, this amorphous blob of different sets of decisions hammering you continuously, right? And you've got to often compromise, make decisions with very little information. You've got these very strong personalities. I've got one, he's called Ken Schwaber. Imagine how that goes, right? Ken, this is what I want to do. Oh, I don't think you should do that. Disagreeing with him is challenging at the best of times. But you're trying to manage all of that stuff. And, you run a sprint review and you get feedback and they say, we want it all. And we don't want any compromise, and we don't want to make any decisions, and we certainly don't want to be accountable for those decisions. It's a hard job, a really hard job. Now, most organizations, the reason why the Scrum Guide is quite vociferous about the importance of decision making to Scrum is that the observations of predominantly, actually Ken, this was, when he was working at a number of organizations. Fidelity was one example, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI was the other one. The classic case studies that you can read about that were in some of those early books, like the Mike Beadle book, etc., with Ken. What he noticed was that Scrum was very, very effective. Scrum, and it wasn't really Scrum as we see it today, but the way that they were working was very effective. They were, work, breaking it down, focusing on a small chunk of it, call that an increment, delivering working software. Many of these projects were software projects. And he was working really well. And what got in the way of that at the end of the day was the lack of decisions. Not only did it get in the way, but it also meant that compromise often crept in. Yeah, we want that, but we also want that. So can you do both? Well, yeah, we can sort of do both. And compromise encouraged bloat and waste in the system. The FBI was a great example. Sentinel program, it was a very famous program, right? They'd spent millions of dollars and had hundreds of people working on this program and built a piece of software that was trying to centralize all the information the FBI was creating, which was very regional at that point. And they're trying to bring it all together. And you can imagine what that like. This regional office says, no, we need to know we're working in Wisconsin. So we need to, the biggest crime in Wisconsin is, lots of stuff with cheese. Is that right? I never know. I think it might be. But anyway, or we're in New Jersey. So that's obviously gambling and, the mafia. Or we're in Chicago. So it's pizzas. Florida, alligators. I don't know. Anyway, so they all wanted all this information specialized for their particular needs. So guess what? It became this incredibly, it's a bit like most CRM systems when you implement them, right? You end up with this sort of like opportunity record that's got 4,000 things on it that if your sales guy goes, yeah, I'm going to use my spreadsheet because it's just impossible. So one of the things that Ken brought in very quickly was he said, yeah, that's great, but what's the most important thing first? And so they made those decision making, and it increased. It was incredibly successful in the end. They actually released some software, obviously annoyed every single regional office and probably didn't get invited to parties, but they got something out. The other thing that's interesting about this experience that they went through, and what Ken went through when he was building Scrum with Jeff, is that they every single time you added all these different compromises and all these different people with all these different needs, it added all these dependencies, and those dependencies ultimately meant things got slower and slower and slower. Dependencies, not necessarily in terms of technology. Some of those dependencies were really, really necessary, but in terms of, oh, well, we want all of this stuff, which has all of this stuff, which we have to go to legal and we have to do this. It became more and more complex ultimately. At the end of the day, complexity increased sort of exponentially as more people got involved and more decisions were made by committee rather than one person. It got harder and harder and harder to break through and deliver some value. So So that's the reason why that's the reason why product owner was invented and became part of Scrum. Now, the new Scrum guide really has taken us to the next level. One team focused on one product, introduction of the product goal, removable, shippable to focus on valuable, definition of what Scrum means when it talks about product. So finally, though we had this product owner initially role, now an accountability, and I explain more about that in a moment, it became this, now we've actually got a lot more stuff behind it. So it's actually a little bit more defined, including what the heck a product is. And I know that's a little bit ephemeral, but ultimately a product is a vehicle to deliver value, has a clear boundary, known stakeholders, well-defined users or customers. A product could be a service, physical product, or something more abstract. I'm not totally sure what that means. I guess it means this is the vehicle that we're delivering. This is the sort of the embodiment of the mission, the change, or the capability, or the value stream, or the whatever that we're focused on. This has a boundary, it has customers, it has some stakeholders that maybe some of them are paying for it, some of them care about the legal risks about it, but ultimately we know what it is. We have a boundary so that we can focus on it, and we have a goal in terms of what we want it to become. Maybe it's the first time we've done it and that's the goal. Maybe we're making changes to it, and then we incrementally release against it so that we can ultimately effectively say that's the right goal, that's the wrong goal. We can start measuring the success of it and get going. So finally, the product owner has a very clear sort of connection to this tangible, bound thing that they're working on, which I think is really, really interesting. Now, another interesting fact, and I'm going to stop in a moment to sort of see if there's any interesting questions, or actually just questions that are interesting. Is the first time Ken wrote about the product owner, it wasn't called a product owner. In fact, you'll see it in that first paper that was delivered to the in Austin, Texas, to the UPSLA event. The product owner actually was called an Agile product manager. Now, the reason why that was changed, when I actually asked Ken about this, and obviously I wasn't there, I was a wee pup at that time, 25 years ago. Actually, I was quite old, but anyway, the reason why it was changed was because he said, we don't describe that product manager is a job title, not a role. Now, obviously, a lot of people think that role and job are the same. So Ken didn't. He believed very strongly that he didn't define in this document enough information to say what it meant to be a product manager, an agile product manager. He described enough in this document to work with Scrum and help the teams to incrementally deliver value and to deliver against a mission or a goal. That's what he was focused on. So number one reason why he was renamed it was because it didn't have enough in his methodology. And remember, the first time he created it he called it a methodology. It's now a framework. It's gone from 130 pages to, what is it, 15, 16, 14, something like that. In German, it's about 20 something. So he basically, that was number one. The second thing is, and this was something that came from FBI Sentinel. He was like, we need people to make decisions. That's why I'm emphasizing the word owner, because they own this thing. Now, at that point, he was thinking very much in terms of software products, actually. That's because that's what he was focused on at that time. But who owns this, can make decisions about this software product. This was, 25 years ago, UPSLA. So that's sort of interesting. So it's not enough, doesn't describe enough what product management is. However, that was originally was called. And the emphasis is that making decisions, that ownership. Now, you can see this is from the Scrum guide. It was virtually verbatim. I'm not going to bore you with it. Communicating product goal, communicating product backlog items, ordering, ensuring product backlog is transparent, visible, and understood. It doesn't have to do it all, but ultimately is accountable for ensuring the value of the product is delivered. The value of the product is delivered. And this is in a nutshell, maximizing value. Now, value is a really interesting word. there's thousands of pages written about it. I was just reading Jeff Gothard's work on it. He's got this fabulous page that has all sorts of references. I'm about halfway through it at the moment on it. But value is very subjective, obviously. Now, the first job as a product owner is to make it less subjective and more objective. So that means measures become incredibly valuable. And now I'm overusing the term, but you know what I mean. So maximizing the value of the product and the development team. Now, this is an interesting point as well. Ultimately, it's the intersection. The team is doing the work, right? Development team. Now, that's called Scrum team now. I need to change this, it's a bit out of date. Oops. But the Scrum team, there isn't such a thing as a development team. But the how much the Scrum team is delivering and how much value that team. So ultimately, the product owner is responsible for that. Sole person is trying to deal with that issue. Now, many people say, well, hang on a minute. You can't have one, but we're this huge, Bank of America, American Airlines, we can't have one person wholly responsible. That's the CEO. And that can cause all sorts of decisions, all sorts of challenges. But ultimately, somebody's got to make a decision. Somebody's got to drive that choice, those choices. Organizations hate making decisions. The bigger the organization is, the more history and legacy that organization holds, the less willing they are to make decisions and have a single person be accountable. That can be a serious challenge, and we'll talk more about that in a little while. They must be empowered to do that. They have to be allowed to make those decisions. And this was FBI Sentinel through and through, no one else is able to tell the development team what to do. The Scrum team, sorry, this is a bit out of date, I should change this slide. Scrum team, what to do. Now, depending on the situation, everything depends, right? But these 4 things are the most important single things that a product owner has in their arsenal. This is what they're focused on. This is their job. Maximizing the value, making the decisions, being allowed to make the decisions, and stopping the churn that can affect many Scrum teams. Okay, I'm going to stop for a minute and see if there's any questions. Catherine.
None in the chat directly, but I wonder if anyone wants to chime in.
Oh yeah, feel free to. I can't probably see you, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't.
Hey, hi Dave, this is Raj. Yeah, I just
Hello,
have one
Raj.
question. Yeah, how are you doing? I just wanted to ask about, must be empowered to make decisions about the product. So are you saying like the product owner should and is the only responsible person to make the decision, or is like empowering others as well? I know as a product owner, I'm the sole owner to make the decision about the product and the roadmap. So
that's a really interesting question. I mean, ultimately, you are accountable for that decision. Does that mean you have to make them all yourself? No, that's actually a really interesting point. That you are accountable. But however, if you trust members of your Scrum team or others, but I'm not quite sure who's involved in those. But if you trust your Scrum team to make those decisions in your stead, that's cool. If it all goes horribly wrong, it's your fault, mate. So, and of course, this is that sort of gray area of accountability, responsibility, empowerment, all of those sort of things. I believe a good product owner, what they do is that they present guardrails to the team to allow self-management to happen. They give a very clear vision. They deliver a definition of what value means, meaning measures or outcomes or something that's demonstrable. If they do that effectively, then the people can make lots of decisions on the day-to-day basis. They're not a bottleneck for that team. Now, what you tend to find is a sort of a tension. Sometimes you think you've got a really clear set of guardrails, you've got a direction, you've got a vision, and you come up to the sprint review and maybe you've been busy, maybe you've been like flying around the world, managing stakeholders or managing Zooms around the world, or maybe you've been on vacation, or maybe you've been, maybe it's the end of the English Premier League season, so you've been in the pub the entire time. I don't know. So when you come to the sprint review and you're like, Oh, no. Oh, and it's like an opportunity then to inspect and adapt. You're like, no, these are the guardrails. No, this is the outcome. No, this is what I meant by that. But great that you empowered and you made those decisions. But let's get more clarity on those guardrails. Let's try to refine our understanding of what outcomes need to be. I think that a good product owner basically sets those guardrails and sets that value. And then, yeah, I think allows, because decisions happen at many different levels as well. You know, let's use computer examples, software examples. You know, is it making a change to this, you know, selection box? Well, you don't want the product owner to make that decision, right? You've got a UX person, you've got a, you know, you've got a software engineer, you've got maybe a business analyst or a tester. You know, you've got people there, you've got SMEs. You know, but then, so that's a decision. No, you know, you want to be empowered to make that yourselves. Decisions happen up and down that sort of hierarchy all the time. And teams are going to make them. And in fact, when in doubt, make it, you know, check in if you can, but let's get to that sprint review and let's make these things transparent. Does that answer your question, Raj?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. I mean, I just brought that point. The reason was like, you know, in this, I mean, we have a lot of Scrum teams and a lot of big organizations following the Scrum. They also introduced a new role called technical product owner. So
that sounds
not
awful.
the right one.
What is that person? Awful. As opposed to the non-technical product owner, which I would like to be, just for the record.
I know. I heard
yeah, I don't like that. Do you like that? I don't like that.
No. Why
would you? Why would you? I mean, so for the technical part of the product, they're accountable for that. For the business part of the product, they're accountable for that. The objective of a good product owner is to seamlessly blend the business and the technology to make decisions about value. Now, to do that, they're going to lean very heavily on the architect or technical type or lead developer or lead, you know, it may be the product is an actuarial system, so there'll be an actuary, you know, the people that know when you're going to die. They're so much fun to take to parties. You know, you're going to be leaning on that person because you don't know everything, but a great product owner asks the right questions. A great product owner grabs a vision from all those different parts, because the technical product owner doesn't necessarily know the business stuff. You know, the technical product owner doesn't understand the stakeholder. You bring in all these things together. So I don't like the phrase technical product owner. It sort of makes me feel a little bit, I was a little sick in my mouth there, you know. Now, however, though, let's look at what we're trying. If I was in your situation, what I would do is I'd say, fair enough, you know, that's cool. So who makes the decisions about the order of the backlog and the value? And you say, well, it's a compromise between the technical product owner and the business product owner. So what happens if there's an impasse?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there can't be. Well, I think the Senate and the House of Representatives show us what happens where you have to compromise, right? And that's going well, isn't it? But the point is, somebody's got to make a decision at the end of the day. And I agreed wholly that a good product owner doesn't make it in isolation. But ultimately, they have to make it and move on. Now, I know lots of people may disagree with that, but you need that speed, you need that vision, you need those guardrails, you need those measures, and you have to work with lots of people to get them. But you need to drive that. It's a little bit. Well, that's the intent of Scrum anyway, and that was why it was created.
So I've seen the use for technical product managers or technical product owners where there's multiple systems that serve multiple product areas. So there's not a direct product owner for a business product area that maps across one-to-one to the systems that support it. So that technical product owner crosses the system or has responsibility for the systems or a specific system that serves multiple products. But they have to make sure a lot of core technology things happen that don't necessarily have any impact to the business owner. They may not have it to a business product owner in 2 or 3 of the product areas, but on a 4th one, it may have a critical impact. They have to be that arbiter across those different product areas.
Right, that's interesting. So I mean, if a system is a technical as a service, say like infrastructure, or or I mean that's the easiest one to visualize, right, in your head. Or I was working in insurance once. We had this rating engine, right, that was used in many different contexts. Basically, you threw in a postcode and it told you how likely you were to get burgled, and it had this like thing behind the scenes that did that stuff. So basically, I mean, you can call them a technical product owner, but that's just a product owner of that system that's serving all these other systems. It has a clear defined boundary. It has a clear customer or a series of customers in this particular example. One interesting challenge there is, what happens when this one department wants to make this change, and that's going to have a fundamental impact. The problem is many of the systems that we built and have evolved, they aren't necessarily connected now as easily to the business processes or the value chains that our customers need. They've sort of evolved because where the economies of the system live, years ago it was, we need, code is really expensive, storage is really, building this stuff's really hard. So we're going to reuse it in many different contexts and sort of overlay it, that sort of overwriting the data division in COBOL. Remember that horror that we ended up in thousands of times. Now it's a different place. We've discovered that the costs are somewhere else and the risks and the issues are somewhere else. But we've got this disconnect between our legacy systems and our businesses. So we have to somehow manage to transition into a value stream to customers whilst our applications are in this sort of like spaghetti mess. And that can be incredibly challenging. And that's perhaps when the role of a technical product owner, as you would describe it, becomes very relevant. But they're really just product owners of a technical system.
Sure. The reason for the term technical product owner versus regular is that the regular product owners, product managers, had external facing relationships. If you're in a company that sells system services outside to the outside world, they had those external relationships. They would go with the sales teams to talk to customers, things like that. But technical product owners normally didn't do that, except to go talk to the technical team and the client if there was very specific technical questions. Their clients were more internal, to your point, internal product owners, that they were then making sure that the technology was kept current and optimized across a broad group of product offerings to external clients.
Yeah. So basically I think we're all violently agreeing, product owner has a very clear bound, sort of a set of accountabilities in the context of that system that is the product, that has a customer, has clear measurable outcomes that they're trying to achieve, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one thing that would be super, super interesting, if they really are building a sort of almost a service-based way of partitioning responsibilities and accountabilities, is let's look at what success means. Let's look at what outcomes we're trying to achieve. Let's build a dashboard that actually, and part of that will be about how the system's going to evolve over time to support different workflows and different business processes, and it becomes super, super interesting. So cool.
Maybe one more question before we move on from the chat.
Catherine.
Cool. Chris Schultz said, in a medium to large size companies where C-level and other departments believe they know more than a PO, do you see this actually being followed?
Of course not. Anyway, so no, this is total pipe dream. I completely agree. The short answer is yes. The long answer is it's hard. So what we've seen is that organizations tend to slip into this way of working very quickly for certain parts of their business, where there's a high amount of churn and also where there's less risk. Maybe it's digital, maybe nobody understands it. And then suddenly, when it looks to go broader than that, it becomes sort of, it slows down in terms of adoption. I think that most organizations now, though, are really looking at some of the interesting findings from the COVID age. So McKinsey did a study recently where they looked at the 7 levels. They have this 7 levels of management, right? Level 7 is the CIO level, or the CEO, or the C-suite, or the very senior people, and level 1 is somebody working in a team doing real work. And then you've got layers. Salaries go up, pain goes down. It's the classic, right? until we do servant leadership, which flips that. But anyway, so you've got this sort of model, and they discovered that communication between levels 6 and 7 to levels 1, 2, and 3 grew like, I can't remember the numbers, but like 600%, 500%. Interestingly, the entire middle tier of management, the communication inside its own tier increased, but it didn't increase to the top and to the bottom. It actually dropped. So organizations now, many of them are like thinking, how are we organized? How does structure, how does information go up and down? What are we doing? And I actually feel like we're at a point, and maybe I'm a little biased here, so I apologize if I am. We're at a point where the industrial organization is being suddenly fundamentally questioned to build something else. Now, obviously, everybody's into the Spotify model, right? So that model where the product owner ultimately was the tribe leader. I know that's maybe a little contentious. Delegated a lot of responsibility and accountability to the squads. But ultimately, that kind of model is starting to look like it might be the most relevant model for structuring at least the product development, not necessarily sales, not necessarily distribution, not necessarily, but even then maybe, but the product development and marketing in product-y type companies, which includes financial services, which includes airlines, which includes most of the knowledge workers, or many of the knowledge workers we're part of, or the knowledge work we're part of. So I'm hopeful that we are seeing a change. It is really interesting to see a more cynical person. There's a gentleman that lives in Boulder called Kurt Bittner. Some of you might know him. He said to me, he reminded me of a quote about science. Science only progresses one funeral at a time. Now, that's a very depressing, isn't it? But the point was trying to illustrate that change is incredibly hard, and that sometimes it requires new people to come on board and to see. Saying that, on Wednesday, I'm at a large C-level conference, internal conference at a large consumer packaged goods organization, the biggest in the world. And these are their R&D heads, all of them in one place, virtually in one place. And we're talking about how to use Agile in a more effective way. And so I'm hopeful that things are going to change, but it is very challenging. But imagine if you were a executive, maybe you've spent all your life getting into the position, and you're like in your mid 50s, late 50s, and you're like, sort of my age, and you're like, oh, I've got a few years to retirement. I've got my kids are finally out of the house, whatever. And you're like, do I really want to risk everything? Do I really want to change this? Where do I fit in this new organization? So it is challenging on many levels. I think it is hard to change, but I'm hopeful, fingers crossed, that we're starting to see empowerment, and we're starting to see this teams actually have, accountability, autonomy, mastery, purpose, so we're starting to see that. Thanks, Kevin. Shall we, let's move on, because I'm conscious I'm probably holding you up from dinners and, mountain climbing or whatever you do in the sort of Denver area at this time of night. I don't know. So let's talk a little bit about the current state of product ownership, and then let's move on to some of those big challenges. What we see, I think, is the point that you just raised, actually, that question. The waterfall type, or the industrial paradigm, business analyst, project manager, all of this stuff is built around a different way of aligning to customers and delivering value. And what we do today is we matrix it all together to try to do so. The other thing is, we just talked about, these legacy systems are challenging. Maybe products exist on the business, but not in IT, and the mapping is complex, which has huge impact. Agile being driven by IT, which again means product ownership hits a certain wall in the organization, and people don't want to be accountable because we have systems and processes that stop that. And then we have the PMO that tries to glue all this stuff in a very well-intentioned way and does its best it can in spite of everything around it. The value stream is sort of like so fragmented that they have to sort of create this mismatch. It's incredibly hard. And that is the reality. I think it sort of reinforces the point that we just we just talked about, that it is challenging, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen. It's not easy. As this person who's juggling, yeah, that's probably even less easy. So these are the 4 things I really want to sort of focus on around some of the fundamental, some very tactical challenges, some of them, where should we focus our time if we're in a product owner role, and then talk a little bit about measurement, and then finally leave it on, okay, what's the job title? How does it all fit together? And see how this grudge match between product owners and product managers can be resolved after we put some context out there. So let's have a little go at that. So, and this isn't everything. These are just some things that I thought of when I was thinking about it. That managing stakeholders, full-time job. Working with a team, full-time job. Dealing with customers, full-time job. Looking at competitors, full-time job. Now you might say, well, in an internal system, you haven't got competitors. Oh yeah, you've got competitors. It's called shadow IT. It's called Excel. It's called, you have competitors. You just don't necessarily realize it yet. Your competitors have got a system that's supporting it. Managing the budget, looking at the ROI, looking at the future, trying to build this vision. And managing the ecosystem that supports your product. Maybe it's dependent on AWS, maybe it's using the Google, maybe there's some AI stuff, managing all of that, keeping an eye on all of that. Where does the roadmap fit in? What about the partners? How does all that fit in? And then building this compelling vision that transforms everybody on this journey together as part of this ultimate story. That's a lot of work, isn't it? It's an absolute nightmare. I mean, any one of these jobs could be a full-time job, right? If you've got a complex product. Just think if your product is called Excel or certain part of Excel, I mean, it's hard. You have to look around. You spend a lot of time doing a lot of things. But Scrum does help a little bit here. The Scrum team ultimately isn't just about building. When we talk about done increments now, with the changes to the Scrum guide to make this a little bit more explicit, what we're talking about isn't necessarily delivering, in the case of a software project, software. It's also doing all the work necessary to deliver against a sprint goal, which moves us towards our product goal. So incrementally, we're moving towards the product goal. Sometimes that means that we have to do maybe, and some PS trainers would get very annoyed by this, sometimes we have to do work that is more about making better decisions later on. Maybe it's about research of our customers. Maybe it's sometimes about doing some competitive analysis. Maybe it's some of those things that are then going to feed into, because that is the best, most economic, most valuable work to do now as we move. Now, ultimately, the value of the product will only actually happen when we deliver something to customers that actually execute on that mission. So we want to do that as quickly as possible, but that doesn't mean we can't do other things as well. You have a Scrum team, use it. The Scrum team ultimately, not only does that, and I think Rajesh mentioned it earlier, he sort of said, well, what about empowered teams? What about who makes, you've got all these people, 7, 10, 9 people that want to help you, that are now compelled to this vision that you somehow painted, or maybe you just got them drunk, I don't know, but they actually care. Let them start doing some stuff, make them engage with customers, let them help you build a survey, let them think about, hey, maybe the most economic way of saying if the customer's going to actually use this feature is we put a button that says, hey, would you press this button to find out this information? And when you press it, it comes up and says, hey, we're currently developing this feature. Would you like to be part of an exploratory team? Oh, wow, that's really cool. Let's try it. Maybe there's some technology we need to do some analysis of. And, but ultimately we're in it together. The product owner is accountable for ensuring that value is delivered and the order of value. But the team is accountable with the product owner for delivering that increment, for delivering that wow, for making that customer happy. Without that, there's no purpose. So use the team, or in the case of a team of teams, the teams. Now, you're going to say, well, should we have a specialist team that just does product work as a separate Scrum team? No, I probably wouldn't do that. But what I would do is, if you've got a teams of team situation, is spread out that work so that that's maybe aligned to some sort of structure in your nexus or in your tribe that allows those people to all work together on some sort of purpose kind of for work. Don't have a separate analyst team. That would be a disaster. I think, that do all the pre-work, that do the refinement, to get everything ready to go into the dev teams. Instead, spread that out. Not that you couldn't do that in Scrum, I think, but it just wouldn't really work, I don't think, because ultimately then you just have that separation of responsibility. You're less flexible. You've got, when work becomes lumpy, they become a bottleneck. All of those things get in the way of that. So the team or teams can help you get the work done. You still have to do requirements. The product owner is responsible for ensuring value is delivered, but not responsible for doing all the requirements. All the user stories aren't written by the product owner. The product owner can help and coach the team. The team should work on these together. Everybody is cross-functional, hopefully, or we're going to certainly help each other be that, because great testers can help you write great requirements. Developers, software developers can help you write great requirements. Everybody needs to work on this together. And it does mean that you get that agility, you share those ideas, and people start learning from each other. And then that means sprint one may be some of that sprint goal. You might do a little bit of technology to prove some stuff, maybe do some spikes, but it's possible that there's going to be lots of sort of like forward looking, hey, how does this work? And the product owner can set those guardrails. We can get a sprint goal that is measurable, that allows us to focus on the outcomes that we're focused on. And hopefully, then you can all work on this together. The one thing that we see over and over again, a sort of anti-pattern for product ownership, is this, that the product owner is the only person that writes user stories, the only person that enters things into Jira. People can work on it and update the things in Jira. That is not the case. Yes, they are responsible for the product backlog. Interestingly, the Scrum team is responsible for the sprint backlog. So they are ultimately accountable for ensuring that this plan, which is what a backlog is, provides some sort of level of clarity. But the only way they're going to effectively do it is by working with teams to do it. And that is that works quite well. Who should they please? Scrum team, organization, stakeholders, the customers themselves? Yes. Or no. The thing about vision that's so important and so compelling is that if you have a good vision, this becomes a little bit less difficult. And this is why a good vision is so important. So Scrum.org has a very clear mission. It's to help people and teams solve complex problems. Everything that we do is in pursuit of that, including Scrum. So it's not about Scrum. Scrum is a mechanism that we use. Maybe there'll be other things that we'll use as well. We've got EBM, evidence-based management. We've got stuff from Nexus. We've got our leadership work. All of these things are supposedly moving us towards that mission. So that gives us, so when I take that mission, I then convert that into a vision. These are the things I believe we should focus on to do that. It becomes easier to keep all of these people happy, or in my case, even Ken. Because whenever I'm now totally pre-warned that every time I have a meeting with him where I'm talking about, what we're doing as an organization, what our community is doing, he asks that question. So now I'm always prepared. So I say, look, these are the decisions that we've made. These are things we're not doing because we believe, and I believe, I've made the choice that these things will execute on our vision, on our mission better. This is our vision for how we do that. And it's a particularly useful mechanism to keep all these people happy. So building this compelling vision is crucial. And these are some of the traits that I try to bear in mind when I'm talking about building a good vision. Empathy, making it personal. One thing that I found over and over again, and this is one really interesting challenge that I see in many, I've been writing a lot about value recently, and about one of the biggest problems we have with Scrum is that people use Scrum to do work, not deliver value. And I may have bored you with this in February, so I apologize if I've said this again, but it's a drum I like to beat on a frequent basis. You know, what I find is that if you can just spend 10 minutes with your teammates and ask them to describe why they're doing the stuff they're doing at the macro level, not that individual task or not that individual story or even that epic, but broader sense. What would be really interesting is how they do it. If they can provide empathy in that description, they'll be a lot more motivated than if they can't. So as a good product owner, one of the most important things that I do is tell stories about people. I tell stories about our trainers, for instance. When we're adding new capabilities, you know, we've got some stuff in our vision about the ability to add classes, to understand overlaps, to do some analysis on when to post a class. You know, and I tell stories about, you know, some of these trainers in India and the UK really need this information to be more effective. And I say, look, it's Paul, it's, you know, and I make it very personal to the Scrum, one of our Scrum teams in our organization. I provide it very clear. I say it's this, not this, and I give a very good guardrails. I make it measurable. Very important that we actually tie those measures to be so you actually measure them rather than they're just some like, hey, we're going to deliver all these features. What does that mean? Why are we delivering those features? How does it contribute? How do we measure success? Is it usage? Is it more usage? Is it less usage? Is it more complex? Is it, you know, whatever? And it needs to make sense. If you can't justify what you're doing in the context of the reason why your organization exists, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. So building that compelling vision is the most important thing a product owner does. Now you're going to say, what about if I'm a proxy? Well, if you can repeat that vision back to the person that's the real product owner and you can take ownership of it yourself, then I think that's incredibly empowering. Even if you feel that you haven't got ownership, just take it. Come on. That person's probably too busy in meetings anyway. And then it can be a lot of fun. Now, I use this magic box when I'm doing that, you know, business model, channel, architecture, features, customer user experience. And I'm looking at this, what's desirable to use, what's feasible technology, what's viable. So I tend to focus on these things because not everything is an opportunity. And sometimes I find the complexity of the thing that I'm doing around the product, it gets in the way of me telling that compelling story. And at the end of the day, it is all about customers. A good product owner is all about customers and the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Because even though somebody else is paying for it, sometimes stakeholders, even though you got compliance and audit, even though you've got all of these other stakeholders wrestling for your time, if you can tell a compelling vision and execute against some sort of, even if it's an internal customer, the reason why you need to deliver these services to these 4 product teams, for instance, if you're in that technical sort of product owner type role, if you can do that in an effective way, then it's a lot more clear for everybody. And ultimately, I think you can make better choices. The best sprint reviews are ones where we talk about a persona, we talk about a desired outcome, we talk about how we're moving towards that outcome. The other genetics company is a company called Dino, and so I was lucky enough to attend. They have a really cool. They've built an entire organization around Scrum for some reason, and they're crazy. No, and they're awesome. I went to a sprint review, and they were talking about the success of the experiments that they were running, and the efficacy and what they'd learned and how they were feeling about it. And they talked about it in terms of, I can't say what it is because I had to sign a CDA, but about a particular patient and a particular problem. And it made it so much more real. And how can we more rapidly improve our the next set of genetic experiments that we're going to do to effectively do that? It made it so much more real. And the tools that you use come from design thinking, lean startup, and of course, Scrum. We're all about this context of a mission, this empiricism. The product owner is managing the empirical process from a product point of view. And you could think then that measures would just fall out, right? If you have a clearly defined product, nice boundaries, clearly described customer, you have a vision for where you're going, measures would just fall out. It's easy in smaller companies, but that example that I can't remember who brought up, somebody on the call, right? Said about, you know, we've got loads of apps, loads of services, everything. Having the conversation about what success means and trying to build some sort of dashboard around that would be really useful. Immaterial of how complicated your organization. You know, what's the value of this cog compared to this other cog? Let's start thinking about that. It's very hard to be empirical and really hard to be a good product owner without good measures, in my opinion. Putting those measures in place is half of the battle. We think about this thing called EBM, fancy build. How cool is that, hey? Where we think about basically external measures being unrealized value and current value, and internal measures being time to market and ability to innovate. Those measures can help us make better choices about, one, how we're working, the work that we're choosing, and how we're doing that work, and what we're focused on, the current value and the unrealized value. As a product owner, I care deeply about all of these measures, but I'm really motivated by the market stuff. So the last bit of this, and then we'll stop for a few questions as I start to wane as we're past 9 o'clock tonight. You know, my gin and tonic's starting to wear off. What should I be called? So this is a really interesting debate. You know, one of the successes of Scrum, honestly, is that Scrum Master and Product Owner are jobs on LinkedIn. You know, it's the reason why it has become such a successful framework. However, that success is both a blessing and a curse. The Scrum Guide does not provide enough information for a job description. It provides enough information to work with Scrum and to make those right choices about Scrum. The reason why the Scrum Guide got updated in the last release to make it accountabilities, not job, not role, was to try to emphasize that. That does not mean you can't be called a product owner. It just means that you have to add a bunch of stuff that isn't in the Scrum Guide, and that is going to be very situational. So I don't know what the job title is. I like product owner because I think it emphasizes that decision making. I think it clearly says that I'm accountable for managing business and technology. Should it be a product manager? I don't really know. It can be. You can be a product manager that is doing the product owner accountabilities. You can be a product manager that isn't. I don't like the word manage though. So I think owner or leader is much nicer, but I respect that there's an entire set of job titles around that. So I guess it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. If there's a fight between the two, it doesn't matter. What I care more about is, are those accountabilities being fulfilled? Have we got additional complexity when choices that are different to those accountabilities are being made around ownership, for instance? And have we got multiple people deciding what the order of the backlog? Have we got a bottleneck around decisions, or teams of people making decisions? Is that undermining our ability to rapidly learn? Is it slowing down our teams and introducing waste? Is the lack of a single person making it harder to get a compelling vision because that vision is a hodgepodge of different conflicting opinions and ideas? I think that's what we need to look for and not worry so much about the job title. I think to some extent, the idea of the job title and the importance of it is a little industrial anyway in its sort of focus. However, I don't have an alternative, so I know we need to still have job titles as I'm a CEO, right? Wow. So, but I do sometimes think that we need to do something else, but I don't have any ideas on that. However, a good product leader looks at the discipline, that's product management, customers, design thinking, lean UX, agile UX kind of stuff, business models, lean startup, and how to work, Agile and Scrum. If you've got those 4 things and you're continuously improving your knowledge of all those 4 things every day, then I think you are an awesome product leader. And I think that's what I'd probably focus on. So we've kind of 60 minutes of conversation is kind of, we're at the end of our time. And I just want to leave you with, the product owner role is in response of an empirical approach, which is agility, right? They're not an agile requirements manager. They don't do all the stories and all that stuff. The teams do that. Now, they may come with a unique set of skills that mean they do a lot of it, but I recommend for your own sanity, you work with the Scrum team to do that. It's an almost impossible role. I'm being honest here. As you navigate business, technology, and people, I think it will get easier though. And I think the reason why it's going to get easier is because of alignment. And I'm, seeing more, hopefully seeing more organizations really take a look at how they can make decisions faster, how they can reduce complexity, how they can basically serve their customers better. And if that starts happening, and I think the product owner, manager, leader role will become, or accountabilities will become easier as they align to the customer. I do recommend design thinking, lean startup. I think those ideas that ultimately those schools of thought are incredibly powerful when you approach the problems that you're trying to solve. The other important point is, and I was recently on a product owner community call at a large financial institution. And I think that community helping each other become more professional in the pursuit of this, tools become valuable. And hopefully agile coaches are becoming more savvy around some of these as well, so they can mentor and coach their product professionals better. And then measurement, starts and finishes. If you can get good measures, then everything else becomes much easier. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Have we got any questions or comments?
I've got one that's been hanging out in the chat. Of course, you couldn't escape SAFe coming up at least once. Do any of your answers change for an org using SAFe?
I'm no expert at SAFe. I know Dean Leffingwell is the reason why I live in America. So he signed the check that moved me to Boulder, Colorado 21 years ago. So, but I'm no expert at SAFe. I think the separation at scale is an interesting yet unnecessary decision. To have this sort of like, okay, you care about the solution and you care about the business, and those two, that separation of product manager and product owner. I don't think it necessarily changes it, but you're going to have to work out who's making the decisions. And at the end of the day, the stuff that's getting delivered, the decisions about priority, that's the product owner. And if the teams are looking to you, and whether it's called a product manager, whether it's called the SAFe product owner, doesn't really matter. I think these accountabilities need to be executed. You can decide where to do them in your situation. And I think that's realistic in any SAFe implementation as well. Every situation's a little bit different, right? But I'm no expert on SAFe, I'm afraid. I've read the books, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert at that.
Any other questions other than Jen preference? There were some of those in the chat, but any other questions?
Well, obviously Aviator, I really do. I know it's a Hollywood thing, and I know but Ryan Reynolds and all that stuff, but it's really quite drinkable. And then there's a really nice one out of Ipswich that I really like, Ipswich, Massachusetts. But I'm drinking a lot of Aviator at the moment. It's cheap and nice. And tell you what, the other thing, tequila, Clooney's tequila rocks. I'm not really a tequila guy, but it's and then somebody's saying that's the reason why you like George Clooney's tequila. Yeah, all right, fair enough. But it's really quite drinkable. Anyway, sorry, I've got small children. It's the only way I survive. Any other questions or comments? Was this useful? Was this interesting?
Yes, it is.
Cool. That was like a godlike voice came down. Yes, it's good. You can carry on. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's hard, isn't it?
Maybe I'm not.
You did mention some tools, and then it'd be helpful for Agile coaches to be able to support your product owners with those. Any of those you'd reference? A short list
of tools. Oh gosh, no, not really. I guess the tools I'm thinking about are things like, personas, gap, doing that stakeholder gap stuff. Basically spend your time, read that Lean UX book. Spend a little bit of time, just a bit of design thinking. I think that kind of stuff, empathy mapping, those kind of things are incredibly useful. I think they're the things that I find really useful. I don't think we spend enough time. I think there's going to be a little renaissance on product owner. Like remember back in the day, we did all this systems analysis tools and everybody was doing there was all these things that you could do, like soft systems by Peter Checkland, Catwell diagrams, all this. There was this whole massive explosion of ways of thinking about problems and analyzing systems and ERPs and all this sort of stuff. I wrote a book on it, Object-Oriented Analysis and Design. It's a fabulous book. My grandma said it was the best book she ever had for killing spiders, which I think is a testament to a good book. Anyway, but now now we're sort of said, no tools, no, we're just going to write stories and have epics and it's all going to be cool. I think we need more tools again. And I think there's a renaissance, particularly around, value stream management and mapping. And I think there's tools that come in from the UX and the D-School work. I think there's and I think all of us to start thinking about using tools. I love the canvases. I love the stuff that, the sort of like product vision canvas, those tools. Starting to think about that, I think is going to be really, really valuable. MC like this so much, they're going to YouTube to watch the earlier talk. Not sure that's good or bad. Thank you, MC.
Any other questions?
Any other questions or comments? I would recommend a book, The Professional Product Owner, by Don McGrill and Ralph Yockham. It's a pretty interesting book. It's got some good stuff in it, useful. That is the book. Yes, that's a cool book. I'm getting well, actually, that's not totally true. We do get royalties from the books, but it goes to a charity called Year Up, so we don't really get the royalties. And there's another book I was just got sent to me, but I started reading. It looked quite good, but can't instantly find it. But I guess.
But that's a good call, because if you think of it, we can add it as a link into our spreadsheet if that comes to you later, which is alive. And I will share the link to this presentation with everyone, as well as any additional links to resources. So I'm going to share the link to the presentation right here. So grab that for later, because you know that Zoom chat will disappear. So grab that if you want to reference the presentation. Give just a few minutes for that. And thank you everyone for joining us on this Monday
night. Yeah, I know September's a really tricky month. Kids have gone back to school. Well, I know your guys went back a long time ago, but it's tricky. So I really do appreciate you taking the time. And as you probably noticed, I care quite a lot about this. I don't know everything, that's for sure, but I definitely have an opinion on some things. So feel free to reach out to me, dave.west@scrum.org or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever technology you prefer. I love talking about this.
And if they grab that link to your presentation, all of that awesome contact information is in the last slide. So check that out.
It is.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Yep.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.